Thanks for that. Thanks for all coming. It's nice to see the back of everybody's laptops. Hope you're tweeting assiduously. It's actually really fun to be at one of these events where the previous speaker didn't spend the whole time lamenting the weeping and lamentations. I mean, I really share Bill's optimism that this is a really great moment, that the kind of worst of the crisis in the industry is over, and that there's a lot of really exciting things going on. In my view, one of the reasons that, along with the kind of changing forms and the possibilities for creativity in forms that Bill is talking about, the central reason for optimism is a shift in the way news is getting distributed. I think a lot of us came to the web in an era when it was dominated by portals. Yahoo.com, AOL.com, MSN.com were the central ways the internet was organized. And then certainly the news industry was kind of first shaken and then I think kind of demoralized by the shift to search engines and the dominance of Google. We're talking 5 years ago, and the fact that it really seemed to favor a kind of fast, cheap, low-quality aggregation over great original reporting. And you'd see you'd see the aggregated version of a story show up on top of the original version on Google. And it created a lot of tension between the old media companies and the new ones who basically, in the view of the old ones, were stealing their content and making money off it. And it seemed like kind of an unsustainable, that just seemed like an unsustainable model, where the parasites were consuming the host. And I think what we've certainly seen at BuzzFeed, and I think what most people's experience of the internet is now, is another really dramatic shift, as if not more dramatic, as the shift to search, which is that search traffic is flatlining, and we're seeing huge amounts of traffic coming in from social platforms, particularly Facebook and Twitter, in news reporting particularly. And I think the kind of news that those platforms favor, and I'll make this case over the next 15 minutes, is the kind of great original reporting a lot of us got into this to do. My own experience of political reporting, and my own sort of sense that the social web had really displaced the older web, came right after 2008. I spent 2008 writing a blog for Politico, and with this very intense audience, and I think anybody who's written for the internet knows the concept of feeding the beast. And this audience was this kind of really ravening beast, but also very satisfying to have these. You knew thousands of readers are hitting refresh on your blog, and that's I think one of the real satisfactions of journalism is connecting with an audience that way. On election day 2008, I remember waking up in my hotel room in Chicago, nailed to my desk for 6 hours, feeling the election sort of coursing through me onto the page. Barack Obama that day, one of the biggest Twitter accounts on the web, then and now, at Barack Obama, tweeted once, and it was something along the lines of, "Please remember to vote." And then over the next 2 years, you could just, if you were working, certainly covering politics, which I think is often a leading indicator of this stuff, you could just feel the beast sort of wander off, and you're still kind of throwing the meat to them, but the beast had gone off to feed at Twitter. And that conversation that had been happening among blogs, and where this very intense audience had been refreshing these blogs for new information, new analysis, the conversation was going on, but the audience had moved, and the conversation pretty much moved then, some writers before, some after, and re-centralized itself in a much more satisfying, better organized form on Twitter, where this public conversation among blogs that was kind of unwieldy between blogs and comment sections on different sites became very centralized, very sophisticated, but also very open to knowledgeable, random people who had interesting opinions or dissents. And I think, in politics, you certainly saw this just intensity of a conversation that, on Twitter would sometimes overtake things that people actually care about, like Justin Bieber. And I think the key point about this shift from, in my case, a blog that was sort of like a portal, in the case of news organizations broadly, from search traffic to traffic from social, is that these different distribution platforms want different kinds of information, different kinds of stories succeed in them, because they have specific characteristics. And these characteristics seem really obvious, but they also really shape the sort of information that winds up drawing traffic and sort of incentivizing news organizations. And search, the most important thing about search is it's private. And again, quite obviously, you don't search for something you don't know yet about. You search for answers to questions. You search for things you know about, for answers to questions that you need answers to. Sometimes there are things that search is great for. You know, if you want to know about if Hurricane Irene is coming, you Google Hurricane Irene. Somebody has created a huge page with links to every story about Hurricane Irene, all the weather maps. That can be very, very useful. And what Bill was talking about, PolitiFact, is like maybe the best use of search. People have answers to a policy question that they've read about or heard from a politician. They Google it. They look for the answer to that thing. They find it on his site. That's a great use of search. But search also really favors, and I think drove a big chunk of the industry into a kind of journalism that nobody really particularly finds hugely satisfying to do, to read, to consume. But certainly it's not what people want. People are spending time at things like Poynter, the Poynter Institute, learning how to do. And this is the stuff that that search engines really favor. Like the absolute perfect search engine journalism is porn and diet pills. And search engines are also open to gaming. It's the basic way to get traffic from a search engine is to trick a machine. And so there's this rise of this practice of search engine optimization. I don't know how many of you have enjoyed or snoozed through SEO seminars, but I mean it's just not recognizably journalism. It's sort of an interesting technical practice, but it's I don't think what most of us got into this to do. And it also killed the headline writing forms. SEO headlines are noun, 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 noun. Social has different characteristics. Fundamentally, it's public, first of all. So you don't see people, nobody, if you open your Facebook feed right now, nobody's going to be saying, I have some time this weekend. Does anybody know where to find the Rihanna nude pics? Like that's not what people do on social. Instead, they're more likely to say, did you see this great, this great video of, I mean, this was a few months ago, but help me stop the Ugandan dictator Joseph Kony, because that's because it's not just people share things they love, but they also share things that make them look good, and that tends to be often and things that they're proud of, and that sometimes is good journalism. People want to be the person publishing good journalism to their Facebook feed, saying, "Oh, did you see this great thoughtful essay in The Atlantic that I read?" Whether or not they read it. And people also share things that are new. I mean, it's just a basic human instinct. You say to your friends, "Hey, did you see this new thing?" And that again is just lines up very nicely with basic news values. And thankfully, social is basically immune to SEO. It's very hard to trick people into sharing things. There has been this sort of bump of social readers that are at their worst tricking people into sharing things. There was a journalist I know had shared some kind of softcore porn, I think by mistake, yesterday out of some social video reader. But Facebook has been clamping down on these things because their readers don't like them. And there are obviously a range of social platforms, each with, to some degree, its own characteristics drawn out of that set. I think that for most working journalists, Facebook and Twitter are the ones you're going to encounter most and the ones really shaping the way we think about journalism right now. And they are very different. Jonah Peretti, the founder of BuzzFeed, likes to say that Facebook is for your heart, Twitter is for your head. And Twitter in particular is incredibly satisfying for beat reporters and for a certain kind of very traditional journalism, whether it's the kind of media reporting David Carr does, whether it's political reporting. It favors scoops, first of all, which is something that I think a lot of news organizations also favor, and that the tradition of competitive, intense reporting also rewards scoops, and so these are. I just went onto Favestar and grabbed some of the things that had gotten a ton of retweets. Obviously, the guy who first tweeted that they had killed Osama bin Laden, that went far and fast. David's story about the Times-Picayune slashing its staff, another, and the scale of the scoops in the nature of scoops can be kind of flat, but this is the sort of stuff that people love on Twitter. It's also the sort of stuff that competitive beat reporters love to do. And so that's and so Twitter has been a very satisfying thing for a lot of us covering beats, and matches up very nicely with the imperatives of beat reporting. Facebook, I think, and folks were talking about this yesterday. I think Facebook is more frustrating for reporters often. It's a less kind of natural ecosystem for a lot of journalism, but it's also a much, much bigger platform, thousands of times bigger in terms of the amount, if something goes viral on Facebook, the amount of traffic that comes from there. And if people on Twitter are looking for new information and scoops and kind of revelations, the kind of what's central to things being shared on Facebook is kind of an emotional core. At its purest, there's a kind of very pure, like, emotional, I hesitate to even call it storytelling, and it's certainly what I think Bill would consider a new form, that travels far and wide on Facebook. This is what nobody went to journalism school to do, but is in some ways symbolic of the kind of stuff that Facebook readers really like to share. And again, it's just pure, almost pure emotion. There were 13 steps, but you only get 4. And I would say that, I think sometimes there's a kind of snobbery in journalism about, well, how could a news organization be doing this silly stuff? As we also have some excellent animal pictures alongside the hard journalism. And I think, smart people can also have empathy for other living creatures. But there's also a kind of something that's maybe a little more recognizable as the kind of journalism we all like to do that you see increasingly on Facebook. And I think Facebook itself has evolved from pictures of your friends to that kind of fun, shareable social experience to a place that you increasingly will see journalism in your news feed, particularly journalism that gives people a real emotional punch one way or the other. This was, just a classic, great New York Times scoop. Somebody leaked them a document of a planned $10 million campaign to label Barack Obama as a metrosexual black Abraham Lincoln, which was meant as a bad thing. But it was just a great scoop. They had this great document. They had very sophisticated reporting around it. They had already, the central player had kind of mishandled their inquiry. And you saw it everywhere on Facebook because I think people reacted very strongly to it. This was our riff on Twitter that, people on the kind of inside joke that then gets shared widely on Twitter about it. And here's another example of a kind of, again, this is a scoop, news reporting that we did, but that also, went very wide on Facebook because again, it was a very emotional story with a real emotional core about sexuality and race. But quality also does very well on Facebook. I was talking to the web editor of The New Yorker, Nick Thompson, the other day, who said that this story got more than 1 million views, most of them from Facebook. And this is a nuanced, ambiguous, thoughtful, long story about the Rutgers gay bullying and suicide. Nobody's like liking it because they agree with its premise. There's no cheerleading aspect to it. But it is a kind of like a story that makes you cry, and it's a story that really engages you, and that people I think share with their friends for the good reason of here is this great thing I want to share with you, and because they want to say to their friends, I'm the kind of person who reads long New Yorker articles. Which if what you want to do is write long New Yorker articles, those are fine incentives. And I think it's been very heartening to see the rise of a distribution platform that, rather than favoring, at best mediocre aggregation and favoring the lowbrow aggregated product over the highbrow original, is starting to be a place where great original reporting, great emotionally compelling storytelling does well, where that's what you ought to be spending your time on, where the day's story, the rewrite of somebody else's story, isn't going to get any traffic. So which was, I think, often the incentive for doing it in the first place. Obviously, I tend to be pretty utopian about the rise of social and the fall of search. It has its it also has its downsides. One of the downsides is that there's not a great fact-checking mechanism in social. And for instance, the Stop Coney video, which was so emotionally powerful, went so viral, was very, advocating very questionable policy. People in Uganda didn't think that it was time for a military solution, which was basically what it called for. It actually seems to have pushed the U.S. to send troops to Africa. And it didn't spread based on its kind of truth value one way or the other. There's this chart that you just constantly see in your Facebook feed that Bill Adair has sought repeatedly to kind of drive a stake through its heart, and it just never goes away because it kind of reflects what people want to think, that it's all Bush's fault. or what some people want to think, and so it just gets shared. And the fact that you know, if you search it, this is what you find. There's no obvious way that this can accompany it into your Facebook feed, although I'm constantly posting it in comments. But I think, you know, the bottom line for me is that the positive changes to the way we organize ourselves as news organizations vastly outweigh the negative, and they'd better, because this isn't like Facebook isn't on the rise because the Poynter Institute wants it to be, or because it's good for journalism. It's just inexorably and very rapidly taking over. We are, I think, because we are pretty focused on social, a little bit ahead of the curve. But this is BuzzFeed's Facebook and Google traffic over 2 periods. And you just see, and I think other news organizations are seeing this more slowly, but really across the boards. I was talking to the guy who runs St. Peter's blog, the local political blog here, who says he now has more Facebook traffic than Google. And so all that brain power that used to go to search engine optimization really ought to be going to figuring out how to make stuff work on Facebook. And I think when it does, I think what people are going to find is that in some ways it's going to be a return to the stuff you were doing before SEO in, as Bill described, totally different forms and different kind of presentations, and the more flexible your CMS, the better, certainly. But you know, when I was hiring reporters at BuzzFeed, I mean, I wasn't looking for people who could who could do a decent version of the thing that was already hot on Twitter. I mean, nobody's going to retweet that. Here's my rewrite of this great story. And I think young reporters are catching on to this as well. I mean, I think a lot of the kind of prestigious entry-level jobs in journalism had been these desk-bound aggregation jobs. When I hired Rosie Gray, this great political reporter, first thing she said when we sat down was, you know, if this is one of these aggregation jobs, I'm not interested. And if what you do is you hire people to do great original reporting, often very short form, to break news, that's what will win these social spaces. And it also is, you know, coincidentally, the kind of stuff that most of us got into this for in the first place. And so I think you know, there's a lot to be really excited about in this big shift. And also the news organizations need to realize this shift is happening very, very fast, and it's something they need to really kind of adjust the way they organize their newsrooms to. So, and I'm under time. So thank you so much.